Y'all an inside view of what it take, what our setup look like, and kind of how we get down when we bring you these Freelunch podcasts. How everything going, man? You got a little opportunity to get away from DC and all such as that.
Definitely, it's the holiday season.
How does it feel to be in the midst of the holidays?
It's refreshing. It's the holiday season, as everyone can tell. This is the holiday edition. I had an opportunity to travel from the East Coast and come to the South, and it's refreshing, man. When you come back home to the South, you just realize how welcoming the people are, and it's really an appreciation to get away from what they call the Beltway, and be able to come down and spend time with friends and family. I had an opportunity to
hold on now.
Wow.
Yeah, I chose the path chose me. This is Lord's plan, divine decree. Natural high, window seat, upper parallel view, let the ghetto see. Hello from the other side. I must have called 1,000 times. I'm sorry.
Welcome to the Freelunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement and the New South Movement Network. This is your boy Tight, one half of the Freelunch Podcast duo. We got the main man with us, BG, the press man, the man that got the press play.
Dog, you got to hit the button. You got to hit the button if you're going to do a podcast. You got to make sure the red light come on. What's happening? BG, the 27 kid in the place to be. Freelunch Podcast coming to you live in the living color in the midst of the holiday season. Merry Christmas to all.
But what's funny is, BG, I guess we got some bloopers.
We got plenty.
We'll be able to show
that one.
We'll be able to show the bloopers.
Yeah.
We'll be able to show again, like I mentioned, that this is take 2 for those listening on the podcast. And when we upload the video to YouTube and you'll be able to watch us, make sure you check out the bloopers because it's actually pretty funny and hilarious. And as I was saying earlier, you are getting a fresh opportunity. A behind-the-scenes look at how BG and I kind of prep and put the show together whenever we get a chance to record. So I'm excited about today's holiday edition. I probably should have started out with the Temptations, Jingle Bells.
Or Donny Hathaway.
This Christmas. We had so many opportunities, different songs I could have chose from.
Right.
But the one I went with was it's the Plies edition of Hello.
The remix.
Hello from the other side.
Plies, wow, boy. Plies and totally put down making records, and he making 15-second Instagram video.
That's the new.
Keeping it relevant.
That's the path forward. That's the
way for sure.
As you start looking at some of the things that have worked in recent years, especially around social media, I think Plies and other, the CC Show. I think there are other different shows on Instagram that are really giving us a blueprint as to the appetite of the consumer, and what the next steps are.
And hopefully we can get in that groove too, man, because there's people that's popping off just based off of Instagram. You got A-Town 705.
Patty Pies.
That dude singing on stage with Patti LaBelle. He actually got a chance to perform with us. Cardi B. Cardi B, Charlamagne is pushing her heavy, so it is the seems to be the new pathway to getting your name out there and having some success.
It is, and it kind of reminds me. That's why I really look forward to this particular show, which is the holiday edition. It's the you got, and that's something I wanted to talk about actually. But this is the holiday edition. With New Year's coming out, we did a show last year entitled Power Circle.
Right.
And I think that, to be honest with you, I think that's one of our best shows. And as we reflect and as we perform a wrap-up of this past year, I think we actually kicked the show off with Power Circle right. And that's the reason why I look forward to this show, because we get to give the audience and the listeners an opportunity and a glimpse into next steps and what we're trying to do for 2016.
And to show how homegrown this is, like this is just two guys that, you know, just sat down one day and decided that we wanted to take to the podcast world and put our opinions out there for the world to partake in, and also judge and criticize at the same time, but just coming from just a pure essence and a sincere place to say, man, we're just gonna go ahead and do it. And to get to this point, to sit here and have a holiday recap show, and having the episodes and the work that we've been putting in is a really good feeling, and hopefully it'll be like inspirational for other people that have something to say to get out there and say it. So I'm excited as you are about the whole thing.
We can't say Merry Christmas no more.
Everybody putting the X in it now, or they just saying Happy Holiday.
Well, what's wrong with saying Merry Christmas?
Man, we living in a. I don't even know how to define what it is, but people are extra sensitive about certain stuff, and then you don't want to step on anybody's toes. So to prevent from doing that, you just keep it plain, keep it broad, and just say Happy Holiday.
Okay.
They had a discussion about that at work. Like, how do you, when people come in to the facility, how do you acknowledge the holiday? And they say, you know, there's much discussion about should you say Merry Christmas or should you just say like season's greetings or Happy Holidays? That way you prevent offending somebody that might not believe in Christmas and all that type of stuff.
So you just say Happy Holidays and keep it moving.
Keep it moving.
Okay.
For sure. Keep it moving.
I just found that interesting because we've become so politically correct to where you can't even be a human being anymore, but we can say that for another show.
Yeah, that's a big show because when you say that, where everybody in this common framework, you know, everyday people, we have to be politically correct. But the people that deal in politics, they didn't move to this thing where they're not going to be politically correct anymore.
That's true.
So they've been talking about they're not going to be politically correct. They're going to say whatever need to be said when it needs to be said, and we are starting to see a lot of that. So it's kind of crazy how we, as a constituents, we got to be politically correct and do stuff the right way. But then the people that's setting the tone, setting the laws, they ain't really got to even care about that kind of stuff. They run the renegade.
They not. And I was actually just talking to Cook today. You all remember Cook, who I thought that's probably one of our more genuine, authentic podcasts. Because his story, I think, is really one of the most inspiring stories. But I said that to say he's in the military. So today I was just talking with him and asking him what his thoughts were on the political candidates and this whole idea. Because whomever gets appointed or elected as the next president of the United States, foreign policy and this whole ISIS deal is going to be a big issue. It's
going to be very big.
And so I wanted to get a sense of what his thoughts were with him being active military and him having to essentially or potentially be summoned to be boots on the ground. Because that's a lot of the discussion between the candidates thus far as whether or not the appropriate path forward is boots on the ground.
And yeah, I was watching the news today, and they said that that's going to be like, I guess, the determining factor in the presidential election this point forward is that ISIS situation is going to become the forefront of what people are going to be talking about and likely what people are going to be voting on. And I believe that ISIS is a real thing, but I'm a little skeptical about the degree of our involvement in this whole process.
Right.
Because, like you say, if it becomes a part of the political agenda, and we have a history of kind of funding some of the radicals that are now part of ISIS, like by it becoming such a big topic, does that serve as like a benefit to that group? Can they use that as something to really
the whole idea
and use that to get to gain political grounding? It's crazy. And we're not focusing really on what's going on in the country and all that's going on.
Right.
So.
But let's use this show as an opportunity to kind of do a 2016 wrap up and then
2015
wrap up.
Yeah,
you all right. 2015 wrap up. and then address some of the questions or some of the common themes that you and I have gotten throughout the year, and give some background and some really just more insight into the Freelunch Podcast and the New South Movement Network. So, if we really look back, we released a show entitled Power Circle. You know, and for me, to me, it really laid the foundation for what our path forward would be for 2015. And in that particular podcast, we talked about how, LeBron James and his circle are really empowering, how LeBron James is empowering his inner circle. And really just talked about how even some of our political leaders should look at this new form of empowerment and really look at trying to see how we can come together and look to empower our inner circles and to push whatever that agenda is forward. And I thought it was just a very interesting podcast that laid the foundation for what we have been able to do thus far. What are your thoughts on 2015 and whether it's that particular podcast or just in general?
Yeah, we'll start with that Power Circle. And after we did that, it really opened my eyes. I started paying attention to, different people having a certain amount of success in different areas. And then you see the connecting point of how that person was under the guidance of somebody else, or somebody came before them that they knew, and then that person pulled them into it, whatever their skill or that talent was. The person that was already established called on that person, utilized them, gave them a platform, and then they take the platform, they go ahead and do what they do, and then they bring somebody else. So you have entertainment, you have in politics, you have in these different realms, circles of people that know each other, networks. And I think Lee Daniels, even though we have, some don't agree necessarily with everything that he's done, some of the projects that he's put out, but if you look at it, he calls on generally the same circle of people to participate and play a role in what he's putting together. And then those people, if they identify somebody, they say, well, man, let's just get him for this role like this and give that person an opportunity to shine. And then it just continues to snowball. And so, taking that forward, I think that's kind of always been a desire or a plan of ours, is kind of do the same thing, is to kind of get in these positions, get this experience, and see certain stuff. And then also being identifying people that we have met or people that we know that have something to share. Give them an opportunity to put it out there so that the world can benefit from it.
And I think the perfect example, and for me, it was confirmation. That podcast we did in 2014, and we released it right around New Year's for those that are interested. And it's called Power Circle. But if we fast forward, it was a couple of months, maybe even June or August. I don't remember specifically, but whenever the source releases its most powerful or most influential, whenever they release it, they typically do it on the Breakfast Club. And it was that episode that gave me confirmation, or that interview that gave me confirmation that our podcast that we did prior to that year was we were on the right path, because it just talked about how they were the most influential morning show and even bigger than that. And so I started paying attention to Charlemagne's circle. Perfect example. I may be a critic of Charlemagne at times. I may agree with what he's saying at other times. But the one thing that I can say is that he is a perfect example of someone that's not a professional athlete, i.e. LeBron, that is empowering his people. If you just look around him, as an example, how he's put even his security guard wax. on on his television show. And if you look at Tax and the podcast and pulling him in with the podcast, and then if you notice how he had Kid Fury and Crystalline, they were on the Breakfast Club, or they were some type of way on his show that he does on MTV2, and then the Brilliant Idiots, and of course Andrew's shows. But it's just so many examples of him getting access to him being able to get into a room, whether it's MTV, whether it's Clear Channel, whomever it is, and being able to bring his people in. And I think that's the model and that's the path forward that we started in 2015 and we will continue to do in 2016. Another example is and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, as part of the wrap-up show, but one of the biggest things that we did this year was going to the A3C conference. I think that also was also big in the development of some of the accomplishments for 2015.
And if you paying attention to what we've done, you could probably tell that there's kind of been somewhat of a more focused approach. This was a change from what we were doing when we first started, but this year has really been kind of focused and targeted on getting to that, what we're talking about, everything kind of rotating around Power Circle, creating one, becoming a part of one, and all of that. And it's interesting that it's kind of a different phenomenon, though, for our community and our peer group. And I guess it's just because we've always been under the myth that you got to make it. You going to make it, and if you make it, it's just because you did it and you made it and somebody just out of the blue discovered you. But I'm becoming more and more of a believer that it is, a lot based off of the network and the connections. Now, you do have to develop the skill and you do have to be ready for when that time calls, but a lot of it is us working together and pulling those talents to really get on the radar, and then if not getting on the radar, creating enough of a buzz and getting enough movement generated that you can make your own noise, and people just have to recognize what it is that you go on. We're stronger when we work as a unit versus just individuals out here just moving around solo. So,
and I think the Power Circle was one of our most. I think it's a good podcast. I think it's one that really kind of summarizes what 2015 has been for you and I. And what we've been able to accomplish. But as we reflect, we've kind of changed, and you mentioned this earlier, but even the focus of this particular podcast it remains authentic and genuine, but organically it's kind of evolved into a different style and even a different approach. What are your thoughts on?
I agree. We brought in people in our immediate circle that we've always known that have been doing stuff, movers and shakers, and we brought them on and allowed them to tell their stories, their personal testimonies, to share what they have going on, to inspire other people. Had Jill come on and talk about making a leap from corporate America to following passion and getting into entrepreneurship.
Which is something that we all struggle with, our peer circle struggle with now. But when you can bring someone on and essentially use this platform to essentially allow that Geo to come on and share her story, the hope and the goal is really to empower the individual that's listening to make that same jump, if that's something they're interested in. But we had Jill to come on. That's a story. To your point, we mentioned Cook. Cook came on and told her what I think is probably one of the more just inspiring stories that you would meet. But it's one of those stories also that it's someone that's in our circle, that immediate circle, that we may even see like, dude, like this is not a normal story. Like this is very inspirational. This is very unique within itself. You really need to get it out there. And I think in a lot of ways, not only is it helping us to empower them or our listeners, but it's helping them to release that into the universe and to be able to share something that they may have been holding on to for years. Mm-hmm. You know, we've also had Selena come on and tell a story about her family situation and her dad, and later on finding out, that her biological dad was, or who she thought was her dad actually was her stepdad, I guess you would put it to say. And then she came to know more about her actual biological father and his family and stuff like that. And we've had stories. We had Laura come on and tell the story. Ladies that Live Beautiful Now tell the story about her sister who dealt with mental illness and ultimately took her own life as a result of that. And just having these personal stories from all ends of the spectrum, whether it be, like we say, making a step in terms of career, but also just these personal stories that I think people want to tell, but it's a matter of timing and a matter of platform. And, and I'm just thankful that we were in a position to allow those stories to get some light and to get some breath and to live and be time stamped. And that's another thing that we talked about too, is creating this capsule of these experiences that come from people that are in our peer group. We don't have to wait till we're 60 or 70 years old to have impact. It's like, let's compile these stories now and put them out there that somebody can be blessed by. We've even gone as light as talking about relationships. Right. We brought in T, and we came in and talked about dating a professional woman, which we get a lot of flack for that one now, bro. I'm going to tell you, we get a lot of flack. They say we missed some stuff on that one. Did they? Okay.
Yeah, they say we can
revisit it in 2016. It's an opportunity for us to revisit it and to have that conversation, but it's also a time and a place where we try to be authentic and we try to be genuine and tell it from a realistic perspective.
Yeah, so it's all good, but even that is beautiful because people are paying attention, and of course after that comes somebody wanting to add something, and we can all learn from it, and that's really, I think, for us is what it's about is giving everybody an opportunity to grow. Mm-hmm. and learn, and we did a lot of that in 2015, and this podcast has taken us a lot of places.
It is, and that's one point I wanted to get into as well. But the key thing is the goal and the hope is that we're capturing and like you mentioned earlier, we're creating this digital library in which we're telling our story from our perspective and allowing those individuals to share their stories so that it can't be told any other way. But it's also empowering the listeners. So the listeners could have that extra motivation and motive to essentially follow their passion, whether it's in Jill's case, to start her own event planning and wedding planning company. So in a lot of ways, that's the goal and the hope. But one thing that you mentioned, and it's actually twofold. The podcast has not only taken us places that I kind of want to name drop here in a second, because we've had some very interesting places that we've gone because of the podcast, but we've also met some interesting people. And one of those was actually from a direct relationship with a close friend of ours. And we kind of talked about it even on her podcast, but we had an opportunity to interview a pioneer in Southern hip hop. And I think that podcast, and I'll allow you to talk about it, but for me, and even that weekend, it wasn't just that podcast, but on that particular weekend, that was probably one of the most defining moments and pivots, I think, in our overall journey thus far.
To see how it all came together, not only the caliber of guests that we had for the actual podcast that weekend, and we grinded it out that weekend. We were really on the move, and we really pushed ourselves, like doing stuff we never done before. But the flow was so smooth, and I think that was a part of the validation. As easy as it was, considering the fact and the way that the pieces, of course, fell into place. we had like what, 3? Was it 3? 3 interviews.
We had 3
2 back to back,
weekend.
and they were top notch. The facility thing worked out. The timing of it all worked out. But then just the way that the actual interviews went. And we try to make our...
And actually, not only did we have 3 interviews that weekend, we actually was able to get another interview
while being
that will end up working out later on in the year.
And we just 2 guys. We neither one of us have gone to any type of journalism school. We hadn't done anything. We just truly operating just off of passion and a willingness and a desire to do this. And we get in and we have these discussions, and they're just pure conversation. I feel like I don't even feel like it's as standardized as some of the stuff that you see on TV.
That's what that's what we've been told.
Yeah, and the people just open up, and then you end up just having these conversations to where they're able to just freely just talk about whatever it is that we talk about. But being able to execute that, like you say, being able to pull those pieces together and put that product out there, for me as well, was truly validation that we were moving in the right direction. And then you go and then you kind of see other people at the actual conference that we were down there for that particular weekend. You see the people doing certain stuff, but then to be right there in the presence of people that are doing this on a high level and to have something to talk to them about, asking them questions about how they produce, how they pull their stories together. And then for you, because you are the man in terms of getting people's attention about the podcast, to be able to say, well, we have had interviews with so-and-so person, and then, of course, getting on their radar. People know about the Freelunch Podcast and know what we're doing. So we just going to keep on pushing on that.
Keep on pushing on that, because like you said, that weekend was, like I said, it was, I think, a pivot point, and really a lot happened that weekend that we've seen some of the results of it thus far. But I think as you all, the listeners, continue to watch the podcast, and notice what I just said, watch the podcast as well as listen to the podcast, you're going to see an evolution and really a new path forward for not only Freelunch, but also for the network, which is something I want to talk about here in a second. But before we even get into the network, because a lot of the network is kind of similar to the way Freelunch Podcast started, in that we had talked about doing it, and then one day we got up and we just did it. One Saturday morning, we just got up and was like, let's just do it. And then we just started recording our very first podcast. And I actually think we recorded 2 or 3 shows that day.
We did.
But it was just, we just got up and just said, let's do it, and we did it. So not to get into the network net, but if we really just go back and then look at some of the other guests that we've had on. I mean, the podcast took us to Columbia University.
New York City. New York City.
It took us to New York City, and we had an opportunity to do Breaking the Lines, and that podcast was, in my opinion, not only was it was the right person to interview, who has become a friend of the podcast and has really helped us to grow. And even from a growth perspective, he's been very supportive and influential. But Sam Freeman, who we interviewed at Columbia, who was a professor there, great guy. And I really just recommend, if you are a listener, to support any of the works that he does for any of the newspapers that he writes for, etc. But that interview alone, I remember after we finished that interview, you and I went and got dinner, but it was just one of them opportunities where you're like, this is how you're supposed to feel after work. This is how you are supposed to feel after doing something that you love, because that was such a joy and excitement from completing that first interview and having someone of Sam's caliber on the show.
But even before that, the thing that really just kind of takes me to another level of amazement is just the way that these people have been so willing to be a part of this. Because you would think that if you've got somebody that's established in in the journalism world.
Keep continuing.
Yeah, somebody's established in these particular realms. People know them. They're renowned. People across the globe know about them, and then we say, hey, we interested in having you sit down on our podcast. Now, we ain't been on TV, we don't have that type of buzz, but the people say, sure, we'll do it. How do you want to go about doing it? It's like, well, damn, is that easy? And I don't know what it is that puts them in a position to do that, or if it's just that they're those type of people. We've had a lot of people that are as sincere and as genuine as this show, I do believe. And because of that, that makes them willing to get into a platform and share whatever it is that they can share if they feel like it's going to help somebody else. So even in Sam's case, I was shocked by that one.
Oh, yeah.
Like he was just so welcoming. He was like, y'all come on. We went to his office. He made us feel right at home and all this type of stuff. And we had a good time and learned a lot. Like, that's another thing that we're getting from this is we don't know everything when we go into these interviews, and then sometimes we know very much to little about what it is that we're talking about, but we end up coming out with so much more information and knowledge about it. It's crazy.
But even from those interviews, we've always left with a nugget. And in that case with Sam, he mentioned the library. And you probably remember the name of it better.
The Schomburg.
The Schomburg Library. And as we continue on this journey for 2015, we interviewed something that was near and dear to my heart. And, BG, when you talk about some of these high-caliber people, Miss Sylvia Doof, she is one of those individuals.
Mm-hmm. It was on C-SPAN. She's done interviews on C-SPAN. She's actually like the director of the Schomburg Institute, which is an institute in New York City that is they specialize in like African history and stuff like that. And so she's over it. So she's well known in that arena, has written a number of books and all that type of stuff.
Spoke at the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
Spoke at the United Nations. So was well renowned in her expertise, but was willing to do a Skype interview with BG and I to essentially talk about the last slave ship, the Clotilda, which my ancestors were a part of that slave ship. But to have her willingness to come on and document this as part of this digital library not only speaks to her, but it also, it speaks to her and how important this is for her to make certain that this story stays intact and is told in a way that it should be told.
And that's what we're here for, because otherwise we wouldn't have probably known much about it anyway.
Hang on the mistletoe, I'm gonna get to know you better this Christmas, and as we trim the tree, how much fun it's gonna be together.